Most people think a repo man is just a glorified car thief with a tow truck. They picture us sneaking around in the dark, hot-wearing Camrys and terrified of getting caught. They think we're the villains of the story, but I'm not a thief. I'm a consequences coordinator. You stop paying the bank, you break your promise, and I come to collect the metal. It's a simple transaction: physics, paperwork, and gravity. My name is Oscar, and I work the rural counties in southern Georgia. It's messy, humid work where you deal with angry dogs, shotgun-wielding owners, and mud deep enough to swallow a boot. But the money is good, especially for involuntary recoveries. That's fancy industry talk for the owner is probably going to shoot you if he sees you. Last Friday, I got a ticket for a job that looked like free money. The target was a 2024 Dodge Ram 3500 Bighorn Edition. Lifted 6 inches, 35-inch custom mud tires, matte black wrap. A $60,000 truck that belonged to a guy who hadn't made a payment in 90 days. The location was the old Henderson farm, 10 miles off the paved road in Blackwood County. The status was listed as voluntary surrender, but the property was marked abandoned, foreclosed. Abandoned. That was my favorite word in the English language. It meant no arguments, no racking slides of a 12-gauge on a front porch, just a quiet drive in the dark, a quick hookup, and a fat payday. I pulled my snatch truck, a heavily modified Ford F-450 with a stealth lift and a muted exhaust, off the main highway around 2:00 a.m. I killed the halogen headlights and switched to the amber running lights. Out here, high beams are just a warning signal to the enemy that you're coming for their stuff. The driveway to the Henderson place was a mile long, a narrow throat of gravel cutting through a dense, suffocating pine forest. The trees were tall and tight, their branches scraping the sides of my cab like fingernails. I rolled the window down to listen. That's rule number 1 of the repo game. Listen. You listen for the snap of a twig. You listen for the rack of a slide. You listen for the bark of a Rottweiler. But tonight, I didn't hear anything. The woods were dead silent. No crickets, no owls, no cicadas buzzing in the heat, just the soft, rhythmic crunch of my tires on the gravel. Weird, I muttered, taking a sip of my lukewarm gas station coffee. In Georgia, in the thick of summer, the woods are never quiet. They usually scream with life. Tonight, it felt like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I rounded the final bend and saw the farmhouse. It was a rotting Victorian skeleton, the white paint peeling off like dead skin in the moonlight. The windows were boarded up with warped plywood. The porch had collapsed on one side, swallowed by kudzu vines. And there, sitting parked in front of the massive, decaying barn 50 yards behind the house, was the prize. The Dodge Ram. It was a beast of a truck, practically glowing in the amber light of my running boards. But as I pulled closer, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something looked wrong. The truck was parked at a sharp, unnatural angle, facing the barn doors. It looked like someone had been in a frantic rush to pull it inside but stopped halfway. The driver's side door was wide open. I stopped my truck 50 feet away, positioning myself for a quick reverse hookup. I kept the engine running quietly. I scanned the property. No movement, no lights in the house. The abandoned note seemed accurate, but the open door bothered me. Why would someone leave a high-end truck with the door wide open in the middle of nowhere? It felt like a trap. I grabbed my heavy Slim Jim lockout kit and my maglite, stepping out of the cab. The humidity hit me instantly, thick and sticky, clinging to my shirt. But underneath the smell of pine needles, wet clay, and diesel, there was something else. I sniffed the air. It was faint, carried on a stagnant breeze. It smelled like copper, like old pennies, and underneath that, spoiled meat. Probably a dead deer, I whispered to myself, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. It happens all the time out here. Animals crawl under porches to die. I walked toward the Dodge, my boots moving silently through the tall, overgrown grass. I kept my eyes on the open door of the truck, waiting for a raccoon or a possum to jump out. I reached the truck and shined my flashlight into the cab. What the hell? The interior was destroyed. I don't mean dirty, I mean shredded. The leather seats were ripped to pieces, the yellow foam padding torn out in chunks and scattered across the floorboards. The dashboard had deep, parallel gouges in the plastic, like someone had taken a garden rake to it. The rearview mirror was ripped off the windshield, hanging by a single wire. But it was the steering wheel that made me freeze. The thick, leather-wrapped steering wheel was bent. Not just cracked, it was twisted into a figure-8 shape. I stared at it, my brain trying to process the physics. It takes about 500 pounds of targeted force to bend a steel-core steering wheel like that. A human can't do that. A crash can't do that without deploying the airbag. I reached out to touch the ruined dashboard, and my hand brushed against something wet on the center console. I pulled my fingers back and shined the light on them. It wasn't oil, it was thick, dark red blood, and it wasn't dry, it was tacky, fresh. I stepped back from the truck, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a repo anymore. This was a crime scene. I reached for my radio to call dispatch, to tell them I was aborting the job and getting the hell out of there. The sound came from right in front of me. I looked up. The massive double doors of the barn, just 10 feet away from the nose of the Dodge, were slowly pushing open. There was no wind. I froze, killing my flashlight instantly to plunge myself back into the safety of the dark. I stood there, paralyzed, listening. From deep inside the black throat of the barn, I heard a sound that didn't belong on a farm. It wasn't a cow. It wasn't a coyote. It was a deep, low rumble that vibrated the wooden floorboards of the barn. It sounded like heavy stones grinding together in a grave. I wasn't alone on the Henderson farm, and whatever was in that barn, I had just parked right on its doorstep. I didn't turn the light back on immediately. That's how you get shot. That's how you get seen. I stood perfectly still in the knee-high grass, my hand hovering over the Glock 19 tucked in my waistband. I'm not a cowboy. I don't go looking for fights. But when a barn sounds like it's breathing, you get ready. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to run. It was telling me to sprint back to the F-450, lock the doors, and drive until I hit the county line. But greed is a powerful sedative. That Dodge Ram was a $4,000 payday. I convinced myself it was just a bear. A big, angry sow bear denned up in the barn, probably guarding cubs. I've dealt with bears before. You make noise, you look big, and they usually scatter. I took a step back toward the open door of the Dodge, keeping my eyes locked on the black gap in the barn doors. My plan shifted. I wouldn't hook it up properly. I would just get in my truck, back up to the nose, drop the stinger, lift the front end, and drag it out of there. I could strap it down once I was back on the paved road. 2 minutes. Tops. I leaned into the cab of the Dodge to shift the transfer case into neutral so the wheels wouldn't lock up. My hand brushed the twisted steering wheel again, cold and slick with the humidity. I tried to ignore the blood on the console. That's when I looked down at the pedals. In the first sweep of my flashlight, I had missed the floorboards. Now, with the moonlight filtering through the trees and my eyes adjusting to the dark, I saw what was jamming the brake pedal. It was a boot, a heavy-duty steel-toed work boot laced up tight. And the foot was still inside it. I froze, my hand still gripping the gear shift. The leg ended just above the ankle. It wasn't a clean cut. The denim of the jeans was frayed and soaked dark, and a jagged splinter of white bone stuck out of the leather tongue of the boot like a broken tooth. Jesus, I hissed, the air catching in my throat. This wasn't a repo. The owner hadn't defaulted on his payments. The owner had been eaten. Crunch. A heavy footstep landed on the dry wood of the barn floor. Then another. The barn doors pushed open wider, the rusty hinges screeching like a banshee in the quiet night. I spun around, abandoning stealth. I brought my maglite up and clicked it on, aiming the beam straight at the gap in the doors. The beam cut through the darkness, slicing through the dust motes dancing in the humid air, and illuminated the inside of the barn. It wasn't a barn anymore, it was a slaughterhouse. The floor wasn't covered in hay or equipment. It was littered with bones, deer antlers, cow skulls, ribcage that looked too wide to be livestock. Piles of white, clean bones were stacked in the corners like firewood. The smell rolled out to meet me, a wave of hot, rotting copper and wet fur that made my stomach turn over. And in the center of the room, on a massive nest made of shredded clothes, mattress foam and old tarp, something moved. It was small, maybe the size of a beagle. It was covered in dark, wet fur that looked matted and greasy. It looked up at the light and hissed. It didn't look like a dog. Its snout was too long, tapering to a point that looked prehistoric, and its front legs were overly muscular, bowing out like a bulldog's but ending in hands that looked disturbingly human. Then another one popped its head up from the pile, and another. There were 4 of them, pups. They were writhing over each other, wrestling for dominance. One of them was gnawing on something white and round, tossing it into the air and catching it. It rolled across the floor and stopped in the beam of my light. It was a human skull, the jawbone missing. I stared at them, my brain struggling to process the biology of what I was seeing. They moved with a jerky, twitchy speed that wasn't right. They used their front paws to grasp the bones, manipulating them with fingers, not just paws. Whimper! One of the pups stopped playing. It looked past me, staring over my shoulder into the yard. Its ears flattened against its head. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking behind me. A sudden, terrifying clarity washed over me. I looked back at the Dodge Ram. I looked at the twisted steering wheel, the shredded interior, and the weird angle it was parked at. The owner didn't park it here. The truck hadn't been driven into this position. The paint on the hood was scratched deep, gouged down to the metal. The bumper was bent outward, not inward. The truck had been dragged here. It wasn't a vehicle. It was a toy. A chew toy for the pups to practice on, something for them to tear open to get to the meat inside. And I was standing right in the middle of the nursery. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. A low, vibrating growl started right behind my ear, so deep and resonant that I felt it in the fillings of my teeth. A wave of heat, humid, rotting heat, washed over the back of my neck. I had walked into the lion's den, and the lioness had just come home. I didn't turn around to look at the beast breathing down my neck. You don't stare down a freight train, you get off the tracks. I dropped the maglite. It hit the dirt, the beam spinning wildly across the grass, and in that chaotic strobe of light, I saw the shadow stretch over me. It was impossibly tall, wide at the shoulders, tapering down to a waist that looked wrong, too thin, too human. I lunged. I didn't run. I threw myself forward, diving headfirst into the blood-slicked cab of the Dodge Ram. A massive rush of air displaced the space where I had been standing. Whoosh! It sounded like a guillotine blade swinging through the humid night. I felt the wind of the swipe ruffle the back of my shirt. If I had hesitated for a fraction of a second, my head would have been rolling in the grass. I scrambled across the ruined center console, my boots slipping on the bloody floor mats, and grabbed the interior door handle. I yanked the heavy steel door shut with every ounce of adrenaline-fueled strength I had. Slam! The door hit the frame, but the latch didn't click. Of course it didn't. The striker plate was twisted. The door bounced back, opening an inch. A black leather-skinned hand, tipped with claws the size of steak knives, shot into the gap. It grabbed the edge of the door frame, right by my face. The claws crunched into the metal like it was tin foil. I screamed, a sound that was half terror, half rage, and threw my shoulder against the door, putting my entire body weight into it. I jammed my heels against the transmission tunnel and pushed, pinning the creature's fingers between the steel door and the B-pillar. A howl erupted from the other side of the door. It wasn't a dog's yelp. It was a deafening, guttural roar of frustration that shook the entire truck on its suspension. The hand ripped free, taking a strip of the door's weather stripping with it. I slammed the door shut again, screaming for the lock to engage. I grabbed the manual lock tab and shoved it down, but it popped right back up. The mechanism was shattered. "No, no, no," I gasped, pressing my shoulder against the door panel, my hands gripping the interior handle so hard my knuckles turned white. The truck rocked violently. She had rammed it. The entire driver's side lifted off the ground for a second before slamming back down. The suspension groaned. This was an 8,000-pound truck, and she was tossing it around like a dumpster. I looked out through the windshield, or what was left of it. The glass was gone, just a few jagged teeth remaining in the frame. Through the opening, I saw her. She was standing by the front fender, illuminated by the faint amber glow of my repo trucks running lights 50 feet away. She was terrifying. She stood on two legs, towering over the hood of the Ram. She had to be 7 feet tall easily. Her fur was a patchwork of dark gray and mange, exposing thick, scarred skin that looked like armor. But it was her face that froze the blood in my veins. It was a wolf's muzzle, elongated and filled with rows of yellow, serrated teeth, but the eyes were set forward, intelligent, amber fire burning with pure, calculated malice. She wasn't mindlessly attacking, she was assessing. She looked at the open window frame where the glass should have been. She looked at me, huddled against the door. She realized the truck wasn't a fortress, it was a can, and she had already opened it once before. She stepped closer, her movements fluid and silent despite her size. She reached through the open window frame. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the passenger door, kicking at her hand. Her arm was impossibly long. Her claws raked the air inches from my face, slashing the already ruined leather of the driver's seat. The smell hit me again, rotting meat and musk, so strong it made my eyes water. She couldn't reach me if I stayed on the passenger side, but I couldn't hold the driver's door shut from over here. The driver's door groaned. She hooked her claws into the window frame and pulled. The metal shrieked. I watched in horror as the steel door frame began to bend outward. She was peeling the door open like a sardine tin. I had no choice. I lunged back across the console, grabbing the oh-shit handle on the A-pillar and the armrest, pulling the door back with everything I had. It became a grotesque tug-of-war. Me, a 200-pound man, against a biological bulldozer. "Get back," I yelled, knowing it was useless. She snarled, her face pressing into the open window space, inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating off her. Saliva dripped from her jowls onto my arm, hot and sticky. She wasn't just strong, she was heavy. She leaned her weight back, using the leverage to pry the door open. My boots slipped on the bloody floor. I was losing. Inch by inch, the gap widened. I could see the night sky. I could see the pups in the barn doorway, watching with eager, twitching anticipation. I was going to die. I was going to be dragged out of this truck and pulled apart while those things watched. Then suddenly, the pressure vanished. She let go. The door slammed shut again, and I fell back against the seat, gasping for air, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I waited for the next impact. I waited for her to jump into the bed of the truck or tear the roof off. But nothing happened. Silence returned to the farm, heavy and suffocating. I slowly lifted my head, peering over the dashboard. She was standing about 10 feet away near the nose of the truck. She wasn't attacking. She was standing perfectly still, her head cocked to the side. She let out a low, sharp bark. "Yip!" From the barn, the 4 pups scurried out. They moved in a low crouch, circling the truck, their claws clicking on the gravel. The mother looked at them, then looked back at me. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't giving up. She took a step back and sat down on her haunches, blocking the path to my repo truck. A cold realization washed over me, chilling me deeper than the fear of death. She hadn't stopped because she couldn't get in. She could have ripped that door off its hinges if she really wanted to. She stopped because she didn't want to kill me herself. She was bringing the kids to the table. I wasn't an enemy to be destroyed. I was a training exercise. The silence that followed was worse than the roaring. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a classroom right before a test begins. I stayed pressed against the passenger door, my boots slipping on the blood-slicked transmission tunnel, chest heaving. Through the shattered gap where the windshield used to be, I watched the mother. She sat on her haunches 10 yards away, immobile as a gargoyle, her amber eyes locked on the truck. She wasn't panting. She wasn't packing. She was waiting. Then she let out a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't a growl and it wasn't a howl. It was a low, rhythmic chuffing noise from deep in her chest. It was a command. The 4 pups who had been circling the truck with jerky, nervous energy suddenly snapped to attention. They looked at her, then at the truck, then back at her. She tipped her snout toward me, toward the ram, and chuffed again, sharper this time. My stomach dropped through the floor. It wasn't a standoff. It was a seminar. The first pup, the boldest one with a patch of white fur on its chest, scurried forward. It didn't charge. It moved with a curious, loping gait, sniffing the air. It approached the front bumper and started gnawing on the plastic trim, its teeth scraping against the fog lights. The mother let out a sharp, guttural bark. No. The pup flinched and backed away from the bumper. It looked at her, confused. She stood up, took 2 strides toward the truck, and then vividly, deliberately, mimed a motion. She raised one massive hand and hooked her claws into the air, pulling back. Then she pointed her snout at the door handle. She was teaching them how to shuck the oyster. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The twisted steering wheel, the dragged truck, the missing foot, it wasn't just savagery. The previous owner hadn't just been eaten, he had been the first practice dummy. And now school was back in session. "You gotta be kidding me," I whispered, my voice trembling. I wasn't fighting for my life against a monster. I was the final exam for a litter of nightmares. The bold pup moved in again. This time it ignored the bumper. It scrambled up onto the running board, its claws clicking on the metal. It stood on its hind legs, wobbling slightly, and sniffed the door handle. It pawed at it, clumsy and uncoordinated. I kicked the door from the inside. Bam! The pup yelped and fell backward into the dirt. I expected the mother to charge. I expected her to tear the roof off in retaliation. But she didn't move. She just watched, her head tilted slightly. She wasn't angry that I fought back. She wanted me to fight back. Dead prey is easy. Live prey teaches lessons. If I made it hard for them, they would learn faster. Another pup, smaller than the first, decided to try a different route. It leaped onto the hood. I heard the metal buckle under its weight. It slid on the sleek mat wrap, its claws screeching like nails on a chalkboard, leaving deep silver gouges in the black finish. It found its footing and crawled toward the windshield opening. I saw its face clearly in the ambient light. It didn't look like a wolf pup. It looked like a gargoyle carved out of raw meat and hate. Its eyes were milky blue, still young, but its teeth were needle-sharp and visibly white against its dark gums. It leaned in through the broken glass, snapping its jaws at me, testing the range. "Get back," I shouted, grabbing a handful of the shredded upholstery foam and throwing it at the thing. The pup snapped the foam out of the air, shaking its head violently, tearing the yellow sponge to shreds in seconds. It spat the pieces out and growled, a high, rasping sound like tearing canvas. It liked this game. I looked around the cab frantically for a weapon. My Glock was in my waistband, but I hesitated. I had 15 rounds. There were 4 pups and 1 massive mother. If I shot a pup, would the mother intervene? Would she decide the lesson was over and just finish me herself? I decided not to find out yet. The pup on the hood grew bolder. It placed one paw on the dashboard, leaning its weight into the cab. I lashed out with my boot, aiming for its nose. My steel toe connected with a solid thud. The pup squealed and scrambled back onto the hood, shaking its head and sneezing blood. From the darkness, the mother chuffed again. It sounded almost like approval. Good. The meat fights back. Watch the range. The other 3 pups were emboldened now. They swarmed the truck. I felt the suspension shift as they climbed onto the bed, the roof, the running boards. It sounded like hail hitting a tin roof. They were everywhere, looking for a way in, probing for weaknesses. One of them found the gap in the driver's door, the spot where the mother had peeled the frame back. A small black hand reached through the opening. It wasn't trying to open the door. It was just swiping blindly, trying to catch a piece of me. The claws hooked into the sleeve of my shirt, snagging the fabric. I jerked my arm back, hearing the rip. The claw grazed my skin, leaving a thin, burning line of red. I scrambled to the center of the bench seat, pulling my knees to my chest. I was trapped in a steel cage while 4 demons poked sticks at me through the bars, and their mother graded their performance from the sidelines. The psychological weight of it was heavier than the fear. It stripped away my humanity. To them, I wasn't a man. I wasn't a consequences coordinator. I wasn't the top repo agent in the county. I was just a toy with a pulse. I looked out at my F-450, idling 50 feet away. The amber running lights looked like a lighthouse on a distant shore. It was so close, just a 5-second sprint. But between me and that truck sat the mother. She was grooming herself now, licking a patch of matted fur on her arm, completely unconcerned. She knew I wasn't going anywhere. She knew the lock was broken. She knew the glass was gone. She had all night to let her bobbies figure out how to open the wrapper. And judging by the sound of metal tearing coming from the roof, they were learning fast. 50 feet. In my line of work, 50 feet is nothing. It's the length of a standard driveway. It's the distance from the street to the porch where I usually hook a car and drag it away before the owner even puts on their pants. I've covered that distance 1,000 times in the dark, moving with the quiet efficiency of a ghost. But tonight, looking out through the shattered windshield of the Dodge Ram, that 50 feet looked like the surface of the moon. My Ford F-450 was idling right there, the amber strobe lights pulsing rhythmically against the peeling paint of the barn. Flash, dark, flash, dark. It was a beacon of safety. Inside that truck was a locked steel cab, a police band radio, and a 12-gauge Mossberg loaded with slugs. If I could get to that door, I stood a chance. But between me and the F-450 sat the mother. And crawling all over the roof of my metal coffin were 4 of her students, eager to fail their way into a meal. I took a breath, forcing the panic down into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Panic is useless. Panic gets you killed. I needed to think like a consequences coordinator. I needed to assess the asset and the extraction route. Status check. I turned the key in the Dodge's ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. The electrical system had probably been shredded when they tore out the dashboard, or the battery was dead. The truck was a brick, a $60,000 coffin. I checked the mirrors. The passenger side mirror was gone, ripped off. The driver's side mirror was cracked, but I could see movement in the reflection. One of the pups had dropped off the roof and was sniffing at the rear tire, looking for a way to chew through the rubber. Above me, the metal of the roof groaned. A sharp, rhythmic SCREE pop echoed through the cab. They were peeling back the sheet metal near the third brake light. A claw punched through the headliner, inches from my head, scattering gray dust and insulation foam into my hair. I didn't have time to wait for a miracle. They were going to open the can from the top. I needed a distraction. I needed something to clear the gap. I began to tear through the interior of the truck, searching for anything I could use. I checked the glove box. Empty, save for a blood-stained owner's manual. I checked the center console. just the twisted wreckage of cup holders and charging cables. "Come on," I hissed, twisting around to reach into the back seat area. "Give me something." The back seat was full of trash, fast food bags, empty Monster cans. But tucked under the rear bench seat, wedged against the jack kit, I saw a flash of bright red nylon. A roadside emergency kit. I grabbed the strap and hauled it into the front seat, unzipping it with trembling fingers. Jumper cables, useless. Reflective triangle, useless. First aid kit, too late for that. My hand closed around a thick, wax paper tube at the bottom of the bag. A road flare. I pulled it out, checking the striker cap. It was old, the cardboard tube slightly crushed, but the chemical tip looked intact. Magnesium burns at nearly 3,000 degrees. It's bright enough to blind a pilot and hot enough to melt asphalt. It wasn't a weapon, but against creatures that lived in the dark. It was a supernova. Above me, the tearing sound got louder. The hole in the roof was widening. I could hear the wet, snuffing breath of a pup right above my ear. I gripped the flare in my left hand and the Glock in my right. Here was the math. The mother was sitting by the front left fender of the Dodge. She was blocking the direct line to my driver's side door. If I bilaid out the driver's side, I'd be jumping right into her lap. But the passenger door. I looked at the passenger door. It was still closed. The window was smashed out, but the frame was intact. If I went out that way, I'd have to run around the back of the Dodge, adding 20 feet to the sprint. But it would put the bulk of the truck between me and the mother for the first few seconds. It was a gamble, a terrible one, but staying here meant being pulled apart piece by piece through the sunroof. I looked at my boots. The laces were tight. The mud outside was deep, Georgia red clay, slick as grease. If I slipped, I died. I closed my eyes for a second, visualizing the run. Kick the door, roll out, pop the flare, sprint, don't look back, don't trip. I took a deep breath of the rotting, copper-scented air. "School's out," I whispered. I holstered the Glock. I needed my hand for the door handle and gripped the striker cap of the flare. I leaned across the seat, grabbed the passenger door handle, and ripped it open. I tumbled out into the wet grass, hitting the ground, rolling. As I came up to my knees, I twisted the cap on the flare and struck it. A blinding, brilliant red light exploded into life, turning the dark farmyard into a scene from hell. The crimson smoke poured out, thick and choking. The reaction was instant. The pup on the hood shrieked, blinded by the sudden magnesium flash, and fell off the side. The pups on the roof scrambled back, their claws skittering on the metal. And the mother. Through the red haze and the drifting smoke, I saw her stand up. She roared, shielding her eyes with one massive arm, startled by the sudden star I held in my hand. She was distracted. I scrambled to my feet, the mud sucking at my boots, and I ran. The red light of the flare didn't just illuminate the farm. It turned the world into a bleeding nightmare. The chemical hiss of the burning magnesium was loud, like a pressurized steam pipe bursting, but it was the only sound I wanted to hear. It drowned out the chuffing of the mother and the skittering claws of her brood. For a heartbeat, a single precious second, chaos reigned. The pup on the hood, blinded by the sudden supernova sizzling on the ground, shrieked and scrambled backward, tumbling off the fender into the mud. The three on the roof panicked, their claws screeching against the sheet metal as they slid off the back, dropping into the bed of the pickup to hide from the stinging brilliance. And the mother. She roared. It wasn't a hunting roar. It was a sound of confusion and rage. The sudden shift from deep shadow to blinding crimson violence had startled her. She reared back, throwing one massive arm up to shield her sensitive amber eyes, her silhouette casting a 50-foot shadow against the rotting barn behind her. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the source of the pain, the sputtering red star I had thrown into the dirt. This was the gap. This was the only chance I was going to get. I didn't stand up to run. Standing up makes you a silhouette. I stayed low, scrambling on my hands and knees through the tall, wet grass, moving away from the light, moving toward the pulsing amber beacon of my Ford F-450. The mud was my enemy. The Georgia red clay was thick and sucking, grabbing at my boots and knees with every lunge. It felt like running in a nightmare, where the ground itself is trying to hold you back. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack the bone. Move, Oscar, move. Behind me, I heard the heavy crunch of metal. I risked a glance over my shoulder, just for a fraction of a second. The mother had attacked the flare, or rather she had attacked the ground near it. She slammed a fist into the earth, sending a spray of dirt and sparks flying. She was furious at the light. She swiped at the air, snapping her jaws at the smoke. She had forgotten about the meat. She was fighting the magic. I scrambled to my feet, abandoning stealth for speed. I was 20 feet away from my truck, 15. The F-450 loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and safety. I could hear the idle of the diesel engine, a low, steady thrum that sounded like a choir of angels. The amber strobe lights on the headache rack flashed, yellow, dark, calling me home. 10 feet. I reached for the keys in my pocket, my fingers slick with sweat and mud. I gripped the fob. I just needed to hit the unlock button, grab the handle, and throw myself inside. But then physics caught up with me. The flare, which had been burning with the intensity of a dying sun, did what all flares eventually do. It sputtered. The blinding red light didn't fade gradually. It died instantly, choked out by the wet earth or simply exhausted of fuel. The farmyard plunged back into absolute, suffocating darkness. The transition was blinding. My eyes, pupils pinned by the magnesium glare, were useless. I was running blind in a void. And with the darkness came the silence. The roaring stopped, the scrambling of the pups stopped, the hissing of the flare stopped. For a terrifying moment, the only sound in the world was the ragged gasp of my own breathing and the squelch of my boots in the mud. I slammed into the side of my truck. My shoulder hit the Julie fender, the impact jarring my teeth. I fumbled for the door handle, my hands shaking so bad I could barely make a fist. I grabbed the cold chrome handle. Click. I froze. The silence behind me wasn't empty. It was heavy. It was the silence of a held breath. I felt a vibration in the ground, not a footstep, a tremor. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, prickling with a primal warning that bypassed my brain and went straight to my lizard hindbrain. She knows. She wasn't confused anymore. The light was gone. The distraction was over. And in the sudden quiet, she had heard the one thing I couldn't hide, the heavy, desperate thud of my boots hitting the side of my truck. I didn't look back. I didn't wait. I ripped the door handle, praying the mechanism wasn't frozen, praying I was faster than the shadow rushing through the dark behind me. I grabbed the door handle of my F-450 and yanked. It was locked. In my panic, I had thumbed the fob, but the ancient solenoid in the driver's door stuck. It happens when it gets cold or dirty, and right now, that $50 part was going to cost me my life. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure frustration, and mashed the unlock button again. Click. The lock popped up. I threw the door open, my hand reaching for the grab handle on the A-pillar to haul myself up into the high cab. But I was too slow. The air behind me displaced violently, a wave of hot, rotting pressure that hit me before the blow did. It felt like standing in front of a subway train as it rushes into the station. Then the pain arrived. It wasn't a sharp cut. It felt like I had been hit by a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. A massive, heavy weight slammed into my right shoulder, driving me forward. I felt the fabric of my heavy work jacket shred instantly. I felt the skin underneath part like wet paper. The force of the blow didn't just hurt, it launched me. I lost my grip on the door frame. I spun through the air, my boots losing contact with the running board, and I slammed face first into the Georgia red clay. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me in a wet whump. I rolled onto my back, gasping for air, mud filling my mouth and nose. I was lying in the dirt, inches from the rear dual wheels of my truck. The amber strobe lights overhead flashed rhythmically, flash, dark, turning the scene into a strobe-lit horror movie. In the flash of amber light, I saw her. She wasn't running anymore, she was midair. She had leaped from the spot where she hit me, covering the 10 feet between us in a single, fluid bound. She hung in the air above me, silhouetted against the night sky, her arms wide open, her claws extended like scythes. She was massive, a mountain of muscle and hate descending to crush me. She landed on top of me. Her weight drove me into the mud. I felt ribs crack. Her knees pinned my arms to the ground. She loomed over me, her face inches from mine. In the pulsing light, I saw every detail, the scarring on her snout, the cataracts forming in one of her amber eyes, the thick, ropey saliva dripping from her black gums. She opened her mouth and the smell hit me, a wave of carrion, copper, and old earth that made my eyes water. She roared, a sound so loud it deafened me, spraying hot spittle onto my face. She raised one hand, the claws gleaming in the amber light. She wasn't going to bite my throat out. She was going to open me up like she opened the truck. She was going to peel me. I stared up at the claws. I could see the dirt packed under them. I could see the rot in her teeth. I knew I was dead. Before I tell you how a hydraulic boom saved my life and what happened when I finally reached the levers, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. The banks don't want you to know why these farms are really abandoned. I'm telling you anyway. She lunged and gravity saved me. As her massive weight came down, the mud I was lying in acted like grease. I didn't try to fight her. I twisted violently to the left, curling my knees to my chest and rolling toward the only cover I had, the underbelly of my F-450. Her claws, which had been aimed at my chest, missed by inches. Instead of tearing through my ribcage, they slammed into the sidewall of my rear outer dually tire. The sound was like a gunshot. The tire exploded under the force of the impact, blowing a cloud of rubber and steel wire into the creature's face. She roared, recoiling for a split second from the blast of compressed air. That second was all I needed. I scrambled on my elbows and knees, slithering under the high-clearance chassis of the truck. The smell of diesel exhaust and wet clay filled my nose. I crawled out the other side, hauled myself up by the driver's side running board, and threw myself into the cab. I slammed the door and locked it just as a heavy weight hit the side of the truck. The whole rig rocked violently, nearly tipping onto 2 wheels. "Think, Oscar, think," I screamed at myself. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The diesel engine roared to life, the dashboard lighting up like a Christmas tree. I threw the transmission into drive and stomped on the gas. Nothing happened. The truck shuddered, the engine revving high, but we didn't move an inch. The rear tires, slick with clay and now one of them shredded, just spun uselessly in the deep mud. I was dug in. I was trapped in a $60,000 steel coffin, and the executioner was climbing onto the roof. I heard her claws digging into the aluminum bed of the truck. She was climbing up the back. She knew the glass was the weak point. She was coming for the rear window, the headache rack. I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the silhouette of her head rising above the tailgate. She was preparing to punch through the glass and drag me out by my neck. I reached for the door handle to run again, but I stopped. Run where? Into the dark. With a shredded shoulder and a limp, I wouldn't make it 10 yards. My hand hovered over the center console. Next to the cup holder was a row of auxiliary switches. PTO, power takeoff. I flipped the switch. The engine RPMs automatically jumped to high idle. The hydraulic pump engaged with a mechanical whine that vibrated through the floorboards. This wasn't just a truck anymore. It was a machine. I grabbed the hydraulic control levers mounted between the seats. In a repo truck, these controls allow you to operate the stinger, the wheel lift, and the boom without leaving the cab. It's designed for stealth recoveries, so you can grab a car without stepping out. Tonight, I was going to use it for a different kind of recovery. In the rearview mirror, the mother rose up. She was standing on the wheel lift crossbar, balancing herself to smash the rear window. Her chest was exposed. Her amber eyes were locked on the back of my head. She pulled her arm back to strike. "Get off my truck," I snarled. I grabbed the lever marked boom tilt and ripped it all the way back. The hydraulic cylinders hissed. The massive steel L-arm of the wheel lift, the stinger, designed to lift the front end of a 3-ton pickup truck, snapped upward with the force of 10,000 pounds of hydraulic pressure. It was an uppercut from a steel giant. The crossbar caught the mother square in the chest. It didn't just knock her off, it launched her. I felt the impact shudder through the entire frame of the truck. The sound was sickening, like a wet bag of cement hitting a wall at 60 miles an hour. She let out a sound that wasn't a roar. It was a breathless, wheezing gasp as the air was forcibly ejected from her lungs. She flew backward off the truck, flipping end over end into the darkness. I didn't wait to see where she landed. I grabbed the second lever, boom extend, and shoved it forward, pushing the stinger out, then whipped the swing lever to the right. I was clearing the deck. But the fight wasn't over. From the sides of the truck, the pups were swarming. They had heard the commotion and smelled the blood. One of them leaped onto the running board, its claws scrabbling at the driver's side window. It started hammering on the glass, spidery cracks forming instantly. I looked at the fuel gauge. I looked at the mud. I looked at the PTO switch still glowing red. I couldn't drive out. The mud was too deep, but I had a winch, and 50 feet in front of me was a 4-ton anchor called a Dodge Ram. I grabbed the winch controller. "Let's see how strong you really are." The blow I delivered with the hydraulic stinger bought me exactly 10 seconds of life. I watched in the rearview mirror as the mother rolled through the mud, a tangled mess of limbs and fur. She hit the ground hard, tumbling into the tall grass, but she didn't stay down. She scrambled to her feet, shaking her head, a low, vibrating roar building in her chest that shook the remaining glass in my cab. She wasn't dead. She was just insulted. And now she was furious. Around me, the siege escalated instantly. The pups, seeing their matriarch tossed aside, went into a frenzy. The one on the running board hammered its head against the driver's side window. Crack! A white spiderweb fracture exploded outward from the center of the glass. Another pup was underneath the front bumper, and I could hear the sickening sound of my front tire going flat. They were immobilizing the vehicle. They were taking out the legs of the fortress so they could shuck the meat at their leisure. I stomped on the accelerator, desperate for traction. The engine screamed, the tachometer redlining, but the F-450 just shuddered. The deep Georgia clay, mixed with the rain and the carnage, had turned into a grease pit. With one rear tire blown and the other slick with mud, I was spinning in place. I was digging my own grave. I looked at the mother. She was charging. She covered the ground in loping, terrifying strides, her lips pulled back to reveal teeth that looked like shattered porcelain. She wasn't coming to pull the door open this time. She was coming to punch through the windshield and take my head off. I needed weight. I needed an anchor. I needed a weapon that was bigger than a bullet. I looked in the backup camera monitor. The grainy black and white screen showed the Dodge Ram, the chew toy, sitting crookedly in the mud about 20 feet behind me. It was a 6,000-pound dead weight. "If you want the truck so bad," I snarled, shifting my grip on the hydraulic levers, "you can have it." I threw the transmission into reverse and floored it. The tires spun wildly, slinging mud 30 feet into the air, but they didn't catch. The truck just vibrated. I slammed the steering wheel in frustration. Then I had an idea. I grabbed the boom extend lever and shoved it forward, driving the steel stinger into the dirt behind me like a spade. Then I pulled the boom retract lever while keeping the throttle pinned. The hydraulic arm dug into the earth, dragging the entire truck backward by sheer brute force. It was ugly, violent mechanics, using the boom like a claw to pull myself through the muck. The truck lurched backward, 5 feet, 10 feet. The pup on the running board lost its grip and fell under the Julie fenders. I felt a wet thump as the rear axle rolled over it, silencing its shrieks instantly. I kept dragging myself backward, watching the camera. The grille of the Dodge Ram loomed large in the monitor. I slammed the rear of my wrecker into the front bumper of the Dodge. The impact threw me against the seatbelt, snapping my head back. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the wheel lift lever and dropped the crossbar. I shoved the extend lever, sliding the grid under the Dodge's front axle. Then I hit the auto grip switch. The L-arm snapped shut around the Dodge's front tires. I had it. I was connected. The mother was 10 feet away, launching herself into the air for the killing blow. I ripped the boom lift lever back. The front end of the Dodge Ram shot 6 feet into the air, lifted by the raw power of the F-450's hydraulics. I had turned the dead pickup truck into a 6-ton flail attached to the back of my rig. "Swing!" I yelled, yanking the swing right lever. The entire boom pivoted violently to the right. The lifted Dodge Ram swung with it, tracing a massive arc through the air. The mother was midair when the physics equation changed. She wasn't expecting the terrain to move. The side of the swinging Dodge Ram caught her in the midsection. It was a collision of biology versus heavy industry. The sound was deafening, metal crunching against bone, the wet slap of heavy flesh hitting steel. The sheer mass of the swinging truck swatted her out of the air like a fly. She was thrown sideways, smashing through the rotting support beam of the barn porch. The wood splintered and collapsed, burying her under a cascade of old timber and roof shingles. The impact shuddered through my repo truck, lifting my front wheels off the ground for a second. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I had the weight now. The Dodge Ram wasn't just a weapon, it was ballast. The extra 3 tons pressing down on my rear stinger gave my back tires the traction they needed to bite into the clay. I slammed the shifter into drive. "Move!" The diesel engine roared, black smoke pouring from the stack. The rear tires grabbed the earth. With the Dodge Ram hanging off the back like a broken tail, the F-450 surged forward. I dragged the prize out of the mud, tearing through the tall grass. The remaining pups scattered, yelping as the convoy of steel and fury plowed through their nursery. I didn't look back to see if the mother was digging herself out of the rubble. I didn't care. I hit the gravel driveway doing 30 miles an hour, the Dodge Ram swaying dangerously behind me, smashing into pine trees and snapping saplings as I hauled it out of hell. I was bleeding, my truck was destroyed, and I was dragging a piece of evidence that would require a lot of explaining. But as I burst out of the tree line and onto the paved county road, watching the speedometer climb, I started to laugh. It was a hysterical, broken sound. I checked the rearview mirror one last time. The road behind me was empty. The woods were dark. But on the front seat next to me, vibrating with the hum of the engine, was the repo order paperwork. I picked it up with a shaking hand, wiping a smear of blood off the bank name at the top. That's when I noticed the logo. It wasn't a bank I recognized. It was a shell company. And in the notes section in tiny print I had ignored earlier was a code, FEDINGSCHUDLE, Class 4. I wasn't a repo man tonight. I was Uber Eats, and I had just canceled the order. I hit the asphalt of County Road 9 at 60 miles an hour, and the sound of the tires changed from the chaotic crunch of gravel to a steady, high-pitched hum. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I didn't slow down. I kept the throttle pinned until I saw the glow of the 24-hour gas station at the interstate junction 5 miles out. Only then did I let my foot ease off the pedal. My hands were shaking so violently that the steering wheel vibrated in my grip. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the mother keeping pace with the truck, her amber eyes burning in the dark. But the road behind me was empty, just a long ribbon of blacktop swallowing the red glow of my taillights. The adrenaline dump hit me all at once. It wasn't a gradual come-down, it was a crash. My vision blurred, black spots dancing at the edges of my sight. The pain in my shoulder, which had been a dull throb during the escape, suddenly flared into searing, white-hot agony. I could feel the warm wetness of blood soaking into the fabric of the seat. I was hurt bad, but I was alive. I drove for 40 minutes in silence, the radio off, listening to the rattle of the destroyed Dodge Ram hanging off the back of my rig. Every bump in the road sent a shudder through the frame, a reminder of what I was dragging. I didn't take the truck to the impound lot. I didn't take it to the auction yard. I drove straight to the designated drop zone listed on the work order, a fenced-in gravel lot behind an old industrial park on the outskirts of Savannah. I pulled through the gate, the automatic keypad accepting the code without a beep. The lot was empty, bathed in the sickly yellow buzz of sodium vapor floodlights. I backed the F-450 into the far corner near the drainage ditch. I engaged the PTO, lowered the boom, and opened the hydraulic claws. The Dodge Ram dropped to the gravel with a heavy, metallic crunch. I sat in my cab for a minute, just staring at it in the side mirror. In the harsh light of the yard, the truck didn't look like a vehicle anymore. It looked like a carcass that had been chewed on and spat out. The matte black wrap was shredded, hanging in ribbons like flayed skin. The roof was peeled back like a sardine can. The driver's door was gone, ripped off at the hinges, and the entire passenger side was caved in, molded into the shape of the hydraulic crossbar I had used as a baseball bat. I should have called the cops. I should have called an ambulance. But in this business, you learn quickly that calling the authorities just complicates the paperwork. And something told me the cops wouldn't believe a word I said anyway. I grabbed the clipboard from the passenger seat to fill out the condition report. My hand left a smear of blood on the paper as I clicked the pen. Condition: total loss. Reason: animal damage. I laughed, a dry hacking sound that hurt my ribs. Animal damage. That was one way to put it. I looked at the work order again. I needed to log the mileage and the time of recovery to get paid. My eyes scanned the familiar boxes: VIN number, make, model, color. Then my eyes drifted to the client information box at the top of the page. Usually this box lists a bank: Wells Fargo, Chase, Ally Financial, or maybe a local credit union. But tonight, looking at it under the dome light, I realized I had never actually read the client's name. I had just looked at the payout amount and the address. Client: Apex Biological Research and Asset Management. Account status: TRMNATED Field Test 4. I frowned. That wasn't a bank. I looked closer at the borrower notes section. Usually, this says things like customer is aggressive or watch for dogs. This time, in the tiny, pixelated print that nobody ever reads, there was a string of data that made my blood run cold. Asset: 2024 Dodge Ram 3500. Lure deployment successful. Previous recovery agent: MIA 612. Current recovery agent: Oscar Contractor. Objective: biomass delivery/nest stress test. The clipboard fell out of my hand and clattered onto the floorboard. The previous owner hadn't defaulted. He hadn't missed a payment. The truck wasn't abandoned. It was a lure. The truck was never meant to be recovered. It was bait, dragged into the barn to establish the nest. And when the Apex Corporation wanted to test the aggression levels of the colony, Or maybe just feed them. They didn't send their own scientists. They didn't send soldiers. They sent a Repo Man. We were the Uber Eats driver delivering ourselves to the door. The high payout wasn't a bonus for a difficult job. It was blood money. It was the cost of a human sacrifice disguised as a foreclosure. I looked out the window at the ruined Dodge. They wanted to see if the colony could destroy a hardened vehicle. They wanted to see if a human could survive the trap. I had survived. I had broken their test. I reached down and picked up the clipboard. I ripped the page off, crumbled it into a ball, and shoved it into my pocket. Then I grabbed the Glock 19 from the passenger seat and placed it on the dashboard. I wasn't going to the hospital, not yet. I put the F-450 into gear. My shoulder screamed in protest, but I ignored it. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going to look up the address for Apex Biological Research. I'm a consequences coordinator. That's what I do. And someone at Apex just defaulted on a debt they can't afford to pay.